A warm welcome to the On the Tape podcast. Guy Adami, I'm always joined by Kaitlin, Malin, the COO of iConnections. Kaitlin, how are you?
Doing well.
This is a treat. I mean, this is a treat. You know, there's that, what's that big rock out west where they have people's heads in it? Mount Rushmore, right?
That's the one.
Well, on the Mount Rushmore is one of our guests, and that's Alan Patricof. Alan, an honor to have you here join us.
Those people are dead.
No, well, not necessarily. I mean, depending on who you talk, but yes, they are. You obviously are not, and you got a lot of tread left on the tire. And a soon-to-be legend, Abby Miller Levy. How are you, Abby?
Wonderful. Great to be here.
It is great to have you both. And let's start with you, Alan, because as I mentioned, you're on the Mount Rushmore, but you run 5 miles every day. You're not letting life pass you by, and it all plays into what both of you are working on right now. So just give us a quick primer as to, how you got here and what your vision is for the company.
Well, I'll let Abby fill in, but the way we got here is that my wife had Alzheimer's for 12 years, and I was obsessed with the whole subject, and also got to know also a lot of other illnesses and got to the subject of aging. I mean, people around me were getting older. I'm going to be 90 in October.
Mazel tov.
So I was 85 at the time. And I went to conferences, read all the articles. There were not that many at the time. And one day my son came to me and said, you're talking about this all the time, but Abby Levy is about to actually start an investment fund in this area. And I couldn't believe it because I knew Abby going back several years before when she was the founding president of Arianna Huffington's company, Thrive Global, where I then at Greycroft had invested and was at every board meeting. And I was very impressed by this attractive, you'll forgive me, I'm not allowed to say that.
You just did.
Attractive, very smart woman paired up with Arianna, who was a force of nature, but Abby seemed to get the things done in a very operational basis. And then she decided to leave, and I was kind of upset about it as an investor. And Arianna was smart enough to keep her on the board for a couple of years afterwards. And so all I saw her was at board meetings, and after board meetings, I'd run to my next meeting. She ran to some other place because she was doing something else after that. And so it wasn't like a new name. So but 2 days later, my son, who had been at Harvard Business School with Abby, put us together for breakfast. And a month later, we started a fund. And I came up with this name, Primetime Partners, because people in their older years are all in their prime time. I'm in my prime time.
Well, I'd like to think you're in the prime of your life. But Abby, I mean, this is obviously a bit of a matchmaking situation with one of your classmates turned out to be Alan's son. But any trepidation going in, or was this sort of the right thing at the right time?
I don't know. I believe in fate or orchestrated fate, but this was definitely the right thing at the right time. I had spent a couple of years looking at this space as well, not from Alan's lens, which was really as a caregiver and as an older person seeing his friends retire. My dad's retired prematurely in his early 60s. And then subsequently in his 70s and 80s, or 60s, 70s, and 80s, it begged the question in our country, what happens to older adults? And so I was a McKinsey girl out of college, and so I McKinseyized the problem and said, what's the white space? What exists? So I'd really been interested in, where's the voice and the role of the entrepreneur in building businesses for an aging population. Something that the listeners may not know, but for the first time in human history, there will be more people over the age of 65 than under the age of 18, starting in 2060 in this country, but already is occurring in some Asian countries and Northern European countries. So this is a huge population shift. And so where are all the startup founders? I was a startup founder myself in that community. Where were they designing for this audience? So I was looking for this. So when I had that breakfast with John Patricof and told him I was going to start a venture fund focused on aging, it almost seemed logical that, of course his father was interested in this too. And of course we should start a fund. And of course we should start a fund about 3 weeks after COVID became an official global pandemic. And of course we should raise $50 million over Zoom the summer of 2020. And so it just really, I don't think we ever questioned it. And frankly, our LPs who invested, everyone nodded the way you're investing, which is, well, of course there should be innovation focused on an aging population. This is the biggest global mega trend outside of global warming. So to me, this all felt very preordained. And, we've subsequently invested into 36 businesses. Our team is now five folks, and we're on to fund 2, raising that right now while investing it. So it kind of just seems like it all was just meant to be.
Starting during COVID, that's a crazy time to get started. And now you're up to 36 companies. Tell us a bit more about Primetime's investment philosophy, the types of portfolio companies that you have invested in.
I get asked all this, oftentimes, like, when you say longevity economy, what does that mean? And so there's kind of 2 branches of it. There's the life sciences part that says, what are the pills and potions, FDA-approved medical devices, all of that landscape that says, how can we live to be 100? That's wonderful they're doing that. We sit on the other side of that says, well, what happens when they're successful? And according to the World Health Organization, 50% of the population does live to be 100. What are all of the infrastructure implications for that horizontally across healthcare, financial services, workplace, housing, consumer media? Everything is impacted by this shift. So we're focused on the tech-enabled infrastructure to support an aging population. And so that's why in our Fund 1, about 2/3 of our investments, which we do really early stage, seed to Series A, are in the health tech space, and the rest between fintech and consumer. And we can talk more about those companies, but I think our overall philosophy is that we back, like any venture fund, great founders with scalable businesses that have great product market fit. And I think the only nuance I would add to this, other than our focus on age, on an older population, Alan and I go back and forth. When we started, it was age 65 or older. I've now made it 50, maybe because I want to age into the demographic faster. But other than that prerequisite, I think our other prerequisite is what we call kind of commercial velocity, which is, unfortunately, there's really not a very big direct-to-consumer audience yet. It's not like, even though older adults, 2/3 of them are on social media, they control over half the net worth of our country, there is a consumer audience, but the channel isn't there yet. So a lot of the startups have to rely on health plans and hospital systems and value-based care customers and long-term care and basically enterprise customers.
It's funny, as I was listening to Abby talk, I was on one of your sister programs on CNBC, and I was asked, well, Alan, what can we invest in? My listeners are all stock market investors. What public companies are? And I hesitated about a half a second and said, as far as I know, there are none. I mean, tell me, you name one. Now, obviously, there are long-term care insurance companies like Genworth that are servicing older people, and of course the health plans. But there are no hot names that you can mention that are on the top of your psyche thinking about.
So let me ask you this question.
Oh, excuse me. So that's why we're in startups, because that's the universe.
That's the universe.
And we've looked at 2,000 startups since we started 3.5 years ago.
So let me ask. So the question that begs to be asked, and I will ask it of you. Why? Why was there this void for all these years? Why? I'm not saying you stumbled on that, because it's not respectful of what you've done at all. It's the wrong word. But, why do you think there was this void? Is it just people disregard the aging population, or maybe they think those people are self-sufficient enough where they don't need those types of services? Just thoughts about that.
I think it's a very fair question. I think Abby will have a different point of view, or maybe mimic mine, is that I think people are so focused on millennials, and they're the hot buyers, and they like the new trends, that people who start up companies and build companies that the names of are appealing to that audience. Facebook and Google are not. They have older people as their customers, but they want younger people, certainly when they started up. And nobody was really it's not great for necessarily your product if you're going after a young audience, to then all of a sudden shift to have gray-haired people and people who are aging necessarily in your product literature. So I think it's not, and I think also it was just the time was right. Mm-hmm. People started. Maybe COVID had something to do with it. I doubt it. But people were starting to think about, how do I live longer? You were seeing more and more about exercising and nutrition and people were thinking about the fact that, I'd like to live longer. And by the way, a lot of people were retiring. A lot of people were living well past. My parents died much earlier than I am, and probably yours may be the same. And I think that we just hit the right time in a white space, and most of the people we've financed have been young people themselves, not older people, mostly young people who've had some problem in a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, grandparent, and they've seen problems that exist. And that's why there's this enormous groundswell of startups.
But if you think about it, just because you're older doesn't mean you don't have the same wants, needs, desires as people half your age or third of your age. And I think you've tapped into something. I read a Forbes article where you talked about, people, these are just overlooked people that need to be serviced in a way that, we take for granted that the millennials need to be serviced. These people want the same things. Sort of speak to that.
Absolutely. There's this right now, I think it's less than 10% of marketing dollars are targeted on the audience 65 plus. Yet that's where the majority of wealth resides. In fact, a lot of listeners who are in the wealth management business know that it's the biggest wealth transfer of a generation. And a lot of wealth managers are very scared about what's going to happen to those AUM when these individuals pass away. But if you think about, certainly at the high end, the high net worth end, there are the same needs. We're invested in a business called Yes Hearing that is concierge hearing aids that come to your house. Pretty much every business has a concierge, every category has a concierge vertical of it. Why wouldn't hearing aids have a concierge vertical of it?
Instead of going to the store, it's better to have yourself diagnosed in your own home
100%.
environment where you can test the telephone, the television, anything else that's ambient noise, and get something suited to the living environment you're in. So that was the rationale behind Yes.
And if you think about the number in women's health, I love what's going on in women's health, but the number of companies that have sprouted up around fertility. I mean, there's like 20 femtech businesses, and yet a third of people over the age of 85 are going to get dementia. Mm-hmm. So we're talking about fertility issues, which is a smaller number than the people are going to get, the percentage of the population is going to get dementia. And yet up until recently, there are only a couple of companies working on this topic of dementia care management. And so, this is very much an underserved audience historically by entrepreneurs, but we're really seeing that shift. And Alan and I have never discussed this, but I think COVID blew the cover off of this topic. Because for the first time, if you looked at every media channel, you could not change the channel or the digital channel or the newspaper during those first 6 months of COVID without hearing about nursing homes, getting your grandma a vaccine, helping him or her do FaceTime with the grandkids. I mean, we all became caregivers in this country. And it's that experience that I think made every funder and every founder start to pay attention to how they want their loved ones treated and how they themselves want to be treated. So we're definitely seeing that the founders are starting to look at some of these issues. But at the core, this has been very much an underserved audience.
When we started out because we thought this was a fertile white space. Mm-hmm. There were one or two other firms that had this kind of focus, but that's nothing. But we, in addition to wanting to make a lot of money for our investors, our LP limited partners, and ourselves, we wanted to become thought leaders because Abby and I, from the first day, wanted to make an impact on making people like yourselves aware of what the problems are and what solutions are for older people because, we're trying to conquer racism. We're trying to conquer feminism. Ageism is a very serious thing. People, don't really think that people over the age of 70 or 80, in some corners, they think they're out to pasture. And believe me, there are a lot of people active well into their 80s and 90s these days. And of course, we have a couple of people running for president at the moment who are older. And you couldn't even be, whatever you think and whatever your politics are, you couldn't be dealing with these world issues if you didn't have something going on that, enabled you to think about it.
Yeah. Abby, you hit on a good point. You're working with companies that have to deal with the complexities of hospital systems, of, healthcare in general, what trends have you seen in terms of how the portfolio companies are dealing with those systems?
We love enterprise as a channel. We love the healthcare system as a customer for the majority of our companies. And we love that because their needs are so transparent. Medicare is almost $1 trillion expense for our country. It's growing at 8.4% a year. If you told me any of your publicly traded companies, Guy, at $1 trillion in revenue were growing at 8.4% a year, you'd say, that's fantastic. Buy, buy, buy. But when it's coming out of the federal budget and taxpayers' money, and by 2060, healthcare will be 50% of government spend, this is a problem. And so everyone in the healthcare channel is aligned and incentivized around how do we take costs out, except probably the consumer. And so in that sense, our companies that can demonstrate reduction in healthcare spend immediately, not 5 years down the road. And that's, again, where a lot of the life sciences is at. But on the health tech side, it's number one, how do we prevent hospitalizations? The average hospitalization costs $20,000 to $30,000 per occurrence. And falls is the number one cause of hospitalization for older adults. And so, you can have some pretty targeted companies and interventions just around falls. And you're like, wow, that sounds so niche. But it's not when, again, this is one of the biggest concerns of an aging person. So we think what's going on right now in the healthcare channel is they're feeling tremendous pressure. Their margins are being squeezed. Costs keep going up, not down. And so we're really encouraging our companies to focus on immediate ROI and immediate benefits for that piece of it. There's a little less talk about prevention, to be honest. But what we're also starting to see is, people use the word wellness, and wellness kind of sounds squishy. But that's where the whole AI conversation comes in. And I kind of want to barf a little bit every time I use the word AI these days. But where we're seeing it really impact our portfolio is in the usual places like everybody else. It improves workforce automation, workflow automation, it improves customer service. But where it can really help with some of those large enterprise customers is on predictive analytics. How do you know when there's, through gait analysis, through ambient monitoring, like our company Butler, that does ambient monitoring of movement, through heat sensing.
How about Kintsugi, which we have another company which, again, telemedicine monitors it, can detect over a period of time people who are getting more and more depressed, so they're having neurological symptoms you wouldn't pick up normally, and it's
through AI.
Yep.
Yeah.
Through taking the data of the vibrations of people's voices and using AI to crunch the analysis. And so that kind of predictive and preventative diagnostics is really where we're kind of at right now, and very excited about that space. And then you also get to biomarkers and home testing. So during COVID, we all became home testers. Like, my 13-year-old now, she's like, okay, give me the swab. Everyone's super comfortable home testing. That didn't happen before COVID. And so now we have businesses like one of our investments in Cenogenics, which is a longevity clinic,
chain of longevity,
quarterly
20.
Blood draws, and looking at 300 biomarkers. I mean, that's where we're getting to with a little more precision medicine. So I think to answer your question, cost cutting on the one hand, and then using data around prevention and diagnostics are two of the bigger themes that we're really leaning into.
Dawn, I'm going to make fun of you, and then I'm going to compliment you, so bear with me for a second. There's an old joke, you may have heard it. How do you get an Ohio State grad off your front porch? Have you heard this?
No, but I can imagine.
Pay him for the pizza, okay? So that's knock. That's a little knock. But with that said, you've been somebody that's been planning your whole life. Clearly, if you go back and read your bio, I mean, you had a plan.
Better read his book.
Read my book. No red lights. That's no red lights. I'm shameless about it.
As you should be.
It's on
I have
Amazon.
a signed copy.
Well, I would like one.
Highly
as well.
recommend.
Yeah, but she probably bought it. I'm on Amazon and on Audible.
So I mention that because 50 to 75 million people in this country don't have a plan. So wellness is something on the health front, without question. But there's the financial health of people that is sometimes not taken into consideration. And one of your companies you invested in, I'm sure Abby can speak to this, I know you can as well, Retirable, which speaks to exactly that. I mean, empowering people that, again, for whatever reason, do not have a plan. Sometimes, most of the time, through no fault of their own, sometimes it's just the intimidation of the entire system. Speak to that.
Well, it's first of all, not every company provides it. first of all. And second of all, not enough people younger than our addressed audience think about early enough to start preparing for this. And so while we're focused on people, as Abby says, oh, now it's over 50. She was saying over 55 last week. I always say over 60. But you know when you see it, we know what an older person is that we have to address some of these people before they're 50 even to start thinking early enough to have enough money to be able to retire. And you did mention one of our favorite companies, Retirable, which has been focused on this area.
Can you speak to that, Abby?
When I entered this space, Kaitlin, to your question, totally expected a lot of healthcare companies and addressing all these issues. I have been flabbergasted by the retirement savings gap. It's $1 trillion globally, and the average retirement assets that one needs, I think the Wall Street Journal recently says about like 1.2 million or something, and the average American is $100,000. So it is not only that people have their head in the sands, it is very, very scary. So as someone who runs a longevity fund, I get asked all the time, so Abby, what's your advice? Like, as if I'm going to tell them some secret potion or pill or voodoo practice I do to live longer. And I always say two things, which kind of disappoints them. One is max out your 401k. I don't care if you have to borrow against it to do it, max out your 401k. And the second is make sure you have a long-term care policy. There's a lot of different versions of that. You can get them as riders, but most Americans think that in-home care, this is when you need someone to help take care of you in your home, is covered by Medicare. It is not in 95% of the situations. So you will have to pay that out of pocket. And that average cost can be anywhere from $20,000 to several $100,000 a year, depending on your condition.
Depending how long you live.
Exactly. And so where companies like Retirable, in the case of long-term care, Home Care Genie, one of our businesses, they are all actually trying to speak to relatively younger audiences to say this is a priority. And one of the silver linings to this is that with Secure Act 2.0, we are seeing more pressure being put on employers to not only offer 401ks, but there's some new legislation saying that it would be an opt-out, not an opt-in, but you have to opt out. Bank of America, one of our friends, is doing a really great job on pushing this topic on a national policy level. And so this is one of those things where, anytime I meet a younger person in business, they always ask me for advice. I literally go to their 401k because we don't talk about money. We don't talk about money. We don't talk about savings. And we are a world, a whole financial system of asset accumulation. We don't talk about asset decumulation. And so what Retirable does is it forces the topic of what is the best way for asset decumulation and how can we help you do that? So if you can't tell by my energy level, I am pounding the table, passionate about this topic of financial longevity, because this is something that every individual can take positive action on, and it doesn't require, anything other than just voting with your pen.
So
let me throw in something just to help put a frame around this. What Primetime Partners invests in are products, services, and technologies that serve this market that hopefully all the biotech people are going to keep living longer. So the longer they live, the more they're going to need products, and hopefully with a good quality of life.
So I'm curious. I'm curious as to the arc of Retirable. Did they find you? Did you find them? How did that work? Because you're obviously jazzed about it.
We're jazzed about all our companies.
Yeah.
No,
they're like all our children.
Without question.
So Retirable found us early on. This was before, so Alan and I, we launched the fund in the summer of 2020, but had been kind of in conversations talking to folks. And I think when we hung up our shingle saying we were going to start a fund focused on aging and longevity, I think through LinkedIn, one of the co-founders, Ian Yamey, found me. And so we started that conversation even before we closed the first fund to get to know them. And so what we really liked about Retirable is that you had co-founders that had very complementary skill sets. Tyler N, the CEO, is a certified retirement planner. So he had spent time, he then went to Policy Genius, which is a fantastic e-commerce business. And so they really had this complementary skill set. And we're attacking this white space with other funders, fintech funders around them that could help them accelerate the business. But one of the things I'll say, and they'll say it themselves, is it is still a long process to educate a market and convert them to buying new financial services and products. That is a long process. And what they've really expanded to is partnering with incumbent financial institutions like Medicare Advantage brokers and larger wealth managers to distribute versus going direct to consumer.
You both have fascinating backgrounds. How do you tell us a bit about how you get involved with the portfolio companies and help? Obviously, you're incredibly passionate about what they're doing, and there's a wide range of products that you're investing in. How do you get involved in helping the companies to grow?
Well, let me, again, try to put a frame around what we do. Almost everyone you'll talk to in the fund business, whatever stage, private equity, growth, or startup, focuses on a silo. Whether it's healthcare or it's fintech or it's consumer or it's climate or it's energy, that's what they focus on. Primetime takes a different approach. We call ourselves a horizontal fund, which means I'm using my hands to show you we go across every discipline, and all we say is we want to service people who want to service the customer we've talked to you about, older people. So no matter what area you're in, we've invested in companies that will serve your audience. And I said to you before, we want to become thought leaders. I mean, when we started out, there was hardly any articles about this subject. Here you had Business Week a month or two ago, cover was longevity. The Economist cover was longevity. The New York Times had an article about loneliness the other day. You can't go certainly a week without seeing something about our area. So we are focused on the layer that goes across every discipline.
And if you think about from an early stage founder's standpoint, there's three things they need. They need capital, they need customers, and they need team. We're like every other venture fund. We help on capital. Alan has been in the business 54 years. I have been my friends and peer group from my experiences. You know, when you start a firm at 45 and 85 respectively, we have the network to help on capital. But customers is really where we really lean in with our portfolio companies. And so, you know, we were on the call with 3 different CEOs today with follow-up notes of all the introductions that they would like based on our network. And I think that that's just the kind of elbow grease that you put into helping a small company get what they need in terms of that first customer, the first sale, the first pilot, all of those pieces. And so connecting little to big, especially when you have Alan and I who have spent our careers working in and around and have peers that are running or chairman emeritus of these big businesses, that's where we help. And if you ask our founders, they'd say where Primetime is really good is market intelligence. We looked at 2,000 businesses. They want to know what other startups are doing. A competitor to one of our startups just texted me this morning. Did you see this other company raise? Can you go find out how much, et cetera? So market intelligence, customer intros. And then I guess given my background as having spent most of my career in marketing, we get asked a lot for help on marketing and PR and customer acquisition. But it is elbow grease. It is literally hand-to-hand combat. And, you know, we love to be on the same team as our founders. That's why we like doing early stage.
We're here doing this podcast because we hope that someone out there will have a company that could be of interest to us to invest, or an investor who might be interested in investing in this area. We'll take either one.
I'm sure, and hopefully we'll get both. Yeah, without question. So, Abby, I'll ask you this. I mean, after 4.5, 5 years, there's probably some cross-pollination, I would think, in terms of your portfolio companies.
100%, yes.
Both of you speak that. Abby first.
So it's been almost 4 years. Don't age us yet. But the cross-pollination comes in 2 effects. One is the companies working together to cross-sell to each other, their audiences, and also the learning. So we have several companies, for example, that all sell to the same customers. We know that. So there could be a large health plan, one of the big 3 health plans. So we'll get on the phone with several of our CEOs that are all selling into that same health plan and say, okay, guys, what's working, not working, who do you know, et cetera. So that type of within the portfolio, them partnering up and sharing learnings is one piece. But then the second is with our enterprise friends. So you guys may not know this, but AOL has 23 million monthly uniques. 23 million people come to AOL.com every month to get their news.
Are they lost?
Oh, no. AOL's, by the way, go check it out. AOL
kidding,
is awesome.
I'm kidding.
Seriously. Like, I now get my news from AOL.
And over 2 million people are paying AOL every month to be.
And so we can then have a conversation with AOL or with even take someone like, an Edward Jones or a Genworth. And I'm naming these companies because they are so excited and interested in how to serve an older audience. And so there's an economies, efficiencies with being able to talk to large enterprises interested in this space and say, here are not only 30 plus companies that might be relevant to you, but here's another 40 or 50 that we've met. And so I think this question of, portfolio synergy, the best thing you could hope for as an LP is that there's actually synergies in someone's portfolio. And that was really one of our main hypotheses launching this, is that when you become a domain expert, that it's scalable across the portfolio.
Which is why I asked the question, Alan. So I'm sure you can sort of amplify that. You've probably seen things that you didn't. A lot of times things happen that you never in your wildest dreams thought may or could. And, there are no straight lines in life. So sort of speak to some of maybe the interesting stories you've seen over these last 3.5, 4 years.
Well, I want to go back to the fact that we're a horizontal fund. Therefore, there is, no matter which company in our portfolio we have, wants to have relationships with the contacts we've made. And I think, Abby, the number's 80 different relationships, whether it's insurance companies or health plans or an AOL type or media type company, all of whom could help our companies in one way or another. So we were discussing with one of our companies, for example, the other day, let's do a corporate development afternoon. And you look at our 36 company. And by the way, we'll even bring in people that we haven't invested in that we've seen. And here's the list of who we've seen. And we'll bring them in for a show and tell, as long as you have management in the room that has the ability to place business with these companies, because that's what they want. And I will tell you, any company wouldn't want to take jump at any company on the buying side who wouldn't want to jump at it. Any one of our portfolio or companies we know about that wouldn't want to be in that room is very short-sighted. I don't think they exist.
Tell us about your founders. Are most of your founders also from the aging population, 50, 60 or above, or younger?
That would be awesome. But it was actually one of the launching premises we had, which is we want to actively encourage older founders to launch venture-backable businesses. There was a HBR study that Fast Company did with them that shows that founders over the age of 40 outperform younger founders. So, we knew that was something. And in fact, in our own investment committee process, we star asterisks those that have a founder age 50 plus. And right now, 8% of our founders are. We're tracking it. We wish it was higher. We have no specific criteria. However, if you were to take a snapshot of where we are today, almost 50% of our founders are women, which is pretty typical for female-led venture funds, that there's kind of a symbiotic relationship. And over a third of our founders are founders of color. I think that's more endemic to the topic as well that we're investing in, which is that particularly around healthcare and aging, that typically has been the responsibility of the eldest daughter, as people, I put in air quotes, that people often talk about. So, the founders, though, if they have one unifying element to them, is that this is personal, including for me and Alan. That's how we started this. Everyone who comes to this space, this isn't just a capitalist endeavor. It is personal, based on their own narrative, their own story. And that is, I wouldn't say prerequisite, it's just pervasive in this space. And so I would say that is the common thread. And that thread also allows them to attract other talent. We've been amazing. Our team, all three of them sought us out. They were looking for us and for this. They wanted to spend time in this space. And the same with the founders and their ability to recruit their teams. This is a lucrative passion project, if you can put those three words together, for everyone in our portfolio.
Well, it's not mutually exclusive. And, there's another saying, motion is medicine. And I absolutely believe that. And I think you both probably live by that. But Alan, you're still running 5 miles a day, I think.
Honestly, walk and jog.
Doesn't matter. You're moving, right? So speak to the importance.
I'm definitely.
Speak to, again, wellness in all ways, shapes, and forms. But a lot of it, is incumbent upon the individual to sort of get off of his or her ass.
So you want to know what I do? You want to know what I do to be in this shape
Absolutely.
at this day?
And tell them about your scale.
Yeah, well, I should say I weigh myself every day
As you should.
in the morning and in the evening.
I'm going to stop you for a second. You've probably weighed the same for the last 45 years.
No, I actually
Is that
did.
right?
I would say 10 or 15 years ago, I weighed much more. When I started training for other, when I was more serious about training, I brought my own weight down because I started being careful. But in the last 3 or 4 years, I started weighing myself every morning and every night. And if I vary by more than 2 pounds, which is not a big deal, I skip a meal the next day. Like this morning, I had no breakfast. It doesn't make a difference. I don't usually skip dinner. The second thing is I'm fortunate enough to have just gotten married 4 months ago to a fabulous woman. And when we started dating, I got tired of buying her expensive dinners, and she pecked at it and had one bite and then left it there. And I said, I'm not doing it anymore. We're going to split our meals. That was the best decision, the single best decision. I don't like taking home food from restaurants. So we split the drink up front. We split appetizers, main course, desserts. She has tea and I have coffee. But other than that, believe me, the portions we get are so enormous that it is a great discipline. The other thing is I obviously walk every place. I didn't walk here because I thought I might be late, but I would normally walk. I was on 43rd Street. I would have walked down here in a minute. But I do a lot of walking. And I have a trainer 2 or 3 times a week, and I do Pilates on the weekend with a trainer out in East Hampton. So I keep myself active, and I'm socially active. I mean, I do a lot of things. I attend a lot of events, a lot of conferences, and I work.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you have to not retire. Yeah. I think that's the reality of it.
Let me ask. I'm so happy you brought that up.
I stay relevant. That's the most.
You stay relevant. Retirement is an interesting word, but there's a connotation around it that once you're out of the game, you're out of all the games. And, maybe, Abby, if you could in just the last few minutes, speak to the importance of, maybe stepping away from one part of your life in terms of a career, but maintaining other things.
Well, I think the reason why I said the word retire is just the etymology of the word.
Right.
Like, it's just a negative word. It doesn't mean you can't have other chapters. We absolutely should be planning for multiple chapters. And so that's actually one of the questions I get asked a lot. I'm mother of 3 teenagers, and a lot of my peers have taken some time off to raise their kids. I said, great, that was your chapter. That was your 15 years where you weren't working. What are you doing for the next 40 years? And it doesn't mean that work has to be a paid in an office environment. Work can be anything. And work can be gardening. Work can be philanthropy. Work can be actively babysitting your grandchildren. There's a lot of different meanings of that work, but plan for it. Don't sit on the beach.
Yeah. What advice do you have? I think a lot of our listeners have parents who are now aging or not moving around as much. What advice do you have for them in terms of getting their parents to move to live an additional 10, 20 years potentially?
Well, I think all the above. I mean, I would do everything I could to encourage them to stay active, both physically and mentally. I mean, you hear the story about doing crossword puzzles. It's not a bad idea, but reading, going to the theater, doing things that stimulate your mind, get involved in politics, get involved in philanthropy, live a multidimensional life. Don't just retire. I'm not a big believer in going down to Florida and just playing golf. I mean, it's a kind of a turnoff, and a bunch of people. I mean, I don't want to insult anybody on this audience, but you see a lot of other people who are down there doing exactly the same thing. Stay in the game.
Well, Alan, maybe your then girlfriend was so enamored by the conversation or so taken by your good looks that she was unable to eat her dinner at the time, number one. And Abby, before we get out of here, how are investors finding you?
Well, first of all, just email me at abby@primetimepartners.com. But they're finding us through other friends, family offices, and honestly, the media that we do. So shows like this on air is great. But this is very much of a networked conversation. We find that family office managers are really interested in what we do because we work really well with those that want to direct invest. Because we invest so early, we can absolutely co-invest, with no SPVs, to keep it really simple. The topic of longevity is personal to everybody, as well as the social impact we're having by, just this space. So this is the kind of, I think, referral only type space. We're raising our fund too. We're 2/3 towards our goal. So we're kind of selectively meeting some new folks. But it's been, there's been a lot of doom and gloom on the fundraising side. Maybe it's the Allen magic sprinkle on Primetime, but we've really been finding a very receptive audience to what we're doing.
Allen, Abby, thank you so much for your time. This was great. I could do it for a while, but proper decorum and respecting both your time means we have to go. But thanks for joining us.
Thanks for
so
having
much.
us.
Thank you for inviting us.